In the week between the Detroit and Canadian Grands Prix, the UK general election saw Margaret Thatcher's Conservatives win a landslide victory over a divided Labour Party, whose manifesto of unilateral nuclear disarmament, leaving the EEC, abolishing the House of Lords, and expelling American cruise missiles from British bases was described as the longest suicide note in history. The new Tory majority of 144 seats was the largest in post-war history, while the new Liberal SDP alliance polled 25.4% of the vote and were just 700,000 short of getting more votes nationally than Labour, but only won 23 seats to Labour's 209. Future party leaders Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and Jeremy Corbyn of Labour, Michael Howard of the Conservatives, and Paddy Ashdown and Charles Kennedy of the Liberal Democrats all won seats for the first time in this election. On the same day as the election, the Cricket World Cup got underway in England, with the hosts beating New Zealand and Zimbabwe playing their first ever international match, pulling off a major shock by beating the mighty Australia by 13 runs. And following the release of Return of the Jedi the previous week, the summer movie season began to swing into top gear. This week alone saw the release of Steve Martin comedy The Man with Two Brains, horror sequel Psycho 2, iconic thriller War Games, Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy in Trading Places, Roger Moore's sixth outing as James Bond in Octopussy, and Christopher Reeve's third turn as Superman. The summer would also see the release of the ill-fated Twilight Zone the movie, Michael Keaton vehicle Mr. Mom, Stephen King adaptation Cujo, National Lampoon's Vacation, Woody Allen mockumentary Zelig, cult classic Krull, and Risky Business, which made a star of a young Tom Cruise. The craze for 3D movies also gave us Jaws 3D and The Man Who Wasn't There, as well as lower-budget efforts such as Metal Storm, The Destruction of Jared Sin, and Space Hunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone. And finally, the Friday of race weekend saw the publication of the Queen's Birthday Honours List, in which John Watson was given the MBE, that is, a member of the Order of the British Empire, for services to motor racing as he celebrated 10 years in the sport. With just a week between races, most of which was taken up with packing everything up from Detroit, driving the 500 or so miles to Montreal, then unpacking it all again, there was little time for much to change in the F1 paddock, though Arrows had to change all the stickers on their cars, as the Barclay and Marilena deals had ended and were replaced with Pepsi Decaf for the Canadian race. Many of the teams and drivers may already have been thinking about the next race at Silverstone, where several teams were hoping to introduce new cars or other elements. Ozella were due to have 2 Alfa Romeo engines available, Lotus were planning to be able to run both cars with Renault power, McLaren were hoping to have their tag-badged Porsche engines ready, and the Ram team would need to find a more permanent replacement for Eliseo Salazar. At least they were getting plenty of media coverage in Canada, because in the car for this race was Jacques Villeneuve, younger brother of the sainted Gilles, and local media coverage was making the most of it. Since his unsuccessful 2-race stint with Arrows in 1981, Oncle Jacques had won the World Championship Snowmobile Derby and made a 1-race appearance in kart racing, but mostly raced in the Can-Am series throughout 1982. While the F1 teams were in Detroit, he was busy winning the opening race of the 1983 Can-Am season at Mosport Park, with the Ram team in attendance to give him some testing time. So if Jacques seemed destined to be a footnote in Formula 1, he was certainly well known to his fellow Canadians, and had become a focal point of the nation's grief over the death of Gilles. For once, both qualifying sessions were dry, and saw a cracking battle between the 2 Ferraris, Prost and Piquet, over pole, and it was Arnoux who took that top spot for the second race running. Prost 0.1 seconds behind him in second, Piquet just 0.05 behind Prost, and Tombe fourth about a tenth behind. Number 2 drivers Patrese and Cheever filled row 3, then Winkelhock, De Cesaris and Rosberg, the top non-turbo driver, and Giacomelli rounded out the top 10, with the McLarens once again struggling in 19th and 20th. Some unkind souls were suggesting that the Woking team were deliberately doing badly at the moment to put pressure on Porsche to hurry up with the turbo engines, but they had long had a policy of using qualifying to hone the race setup, then making up places on Sunday. Local hero Villeneuve improved his time by some 3 seconds between Friday and Saturday, but failed by just 0.4 seconds to make the grid, though he did at least beat the poor beleaguered Ghinzani in the Ozella Alpha. Despite Villeneuve's failure to qualify, there was a pretty good turnout for the race. Someone had chalked a large number 27, Gilles' number, behind the pole position on the track. If only Tombe had been a few tenths faster, it would have been perfect. As it was Arnoux' number 28 Ferrari which sat there. For the third race in a row, the start was problematic. This time a power cut hit the city just as things were getting set up and forced an hour's delay, but it was a fine day and nobody seemed to mind too much. Arnoux went and sunbathed for half an hour or so. Finally, the race was ready to get underway, the red lights came on, and then the green, and 26 cars roared away, with Arnoux at their head, then Prost, a fast-starting Prix who quickly got past the Renault too, Piquet and Tambay, while at the back both Sura and Jarier were slow off the line but got underway eventually, though both came in to retire shortly afterwards with transmission issues. Elio De Angelis also came in on lap 2 with a broken throttle. Meanwhile, Arnoux was starting to pull away a little from Prix, another driver facing an uncertain future with his team and still yet to score this year, while Piquet had made his way past Prost, whose engine was beginning to misfire, and Tambay and Cheever were right behind him. Behind them, De Cesaris had Rosberg right on his tail and pushing hard, with Winkelhock and Lafitte keeping a watching brief in case the two in front took each other out. Rosberg ducked and weaved and harried, but De Cesaris was having none of it, and his turbo power was able to keep the Alfa ahead. The battle resolved itself for the time being on lap 10 as the pair touched wheels at the hairpin and bounced Rosberg. He was able to continue, though Winkelhock and Lafitte both got through. The next lap, Tambay managed to get past Prost with a neat little pass and immediately began to pull away. Prost's misfire was getting worse, and he was now about 800 horsepower down at the top end, with his teammate Cheever shaping up to pass too. He got past at the end of lap 14, and Prost was soon left behind. Piquet was coasting into the pits with a broken throttle cable on lap 14, which meant that the battle between Winkelhock, De Cesaris, Rosberg and Lafitte was now won for 6th place, and it was the most interesting thing happening out on the track. While the cameras watched Piquet getting out of his car, Rosberg got past De Cesaris and set off after Winkelhock's ATS, while Lafitte put in a brave pass on the Alfa to follow his teammate. They all moved up a place again when Winkelhock pitted to replace blistered tyres a few laps later, dropping him down to 15th. Meanwhile, Tambay had caught right up to Prix in second place, the pair around 10 seconds behind Arnoux's leading Ferrari as the race began to approach half-distance in the expected flurry of fuel stops. Tambay had an off-camera moment which allowed Cheever through, while Mansell came into the pits for the third time in an attempt to fix whatever it was that was causing his Lotus to run slowly. Prost was the first of the front-runners in for fuel, and despite his misfire, he still had enough of a lead that he was comfortably out in front of Rosberg. Over the next few laps, all of the top men came in for their stops, and everyone was in and out with no dramas, meaning that once the stops shook out, the order was as it had been: Arnoux, Prix, Cheever, Tambay and Prost, with Rosberg some way behind in 6th. John Watson was 7th after his usual burn from the stern, and was being chased by a lively Boutsen, gunning for a point in just his 3rd Grand Prix. The second half of the race became, as it so often did, a matter of attrition. Lafitte's gearbox failed, De Cesaris's engine wilted in the heat, as did Giacomelli's a lap later, and Mansell finally gave up after 43 frustrating laps and 6 pit stops. His tyres apparently so sticky they were constantly picking up the rubber marbles on the circuit and making the ride unbearable, and a few laps after that, Derek Warwick's Hart engine ingested its turbocharger with smoky results. Patrese gears began to slip, slowing him, accelerating out of corners and allowing both Cheever and Tambay to catch up. Cheever was soon passed and away, followed quickly by Tambay, as well as Watson and Sullivan unlapping themselves. Prost came past too, but then got a puncture and came in for a slightly chaotic unscheduled stop, which dropped him back from the Italian once more. On lap 57, Patrese finally pulled in to retire, so with 13 laps to go, Arnoux led Cheever by about half a minute and had the immense satisfaction of lapping his old rival Alain Prost. Tambay was 3rd, while Rosberg had made his way up into 4th ahead of a spluttering Prost. Boutsen was still up with Watson, and the veteran was having a tough time keeping the Belgian behind, but Thierry's inexperience told as he went for the pass in the wrong place, clipped Watson's wheel and sent a bit of his front wing flying. He was able to continue, but perhaps a little more circumspectly. But up front, René Arnoux answered his critics with a dominant victory, leading every lap bar the couple after his pit stop and winning by 42 seconds over Eddie Cheever, who equalled his best ever finish in 2nd place to spare Renault's blushes. Patrick Tambay came home 3rd, about 10 seconds behind Cheever, with Rosberg the last car on the leading lap, and Prost and Watson taking the last 2 points places. Danny Sullivan finished 9th, but was disqualified for an underweight car, which moved Winkelhock and Baldi up, but otherwise didn't affect much. And so, as the teams went into a 4-week half-term break before the British Grand Prix, Prost still led the drivers' standings by 3 points from Piquet and Tambay, with Rosberg just 2 behind them, and Renault and Ferrari tied at the top of the constructors' table. So far, the 1983 season had panned out to be an exciting, close one, free of the rancour and tragedy of 1982, and long may it continue.